Welcome back to the MMA Plug, presented by the Fan Cave on 98.1 FM, Mile High Sports Radio. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This weekend in the UFC, we have a matchup that is going to showcase the featherweight division in the main event. You have number 11, Soddiq Yusuff, taking on number 13, Edson Barboza. Now, Soddiq Yusuff is one of those first stars to come off of the Contender Series. I think kind of the biggest names to break out and that have really kind of cemented themselves in that pushing toward contender realm and past just that general prospect were obviously Sugar Sean O'Malley, who has now became a UFC champion. But from that same first series of the Contender Series, you now have Soddiq Yusuff, who has built quite the platform for himself. If you ever follow Soddiq online, his breakdowns that he does on Instagram, they're absolutely hilarious. He pretty much puts out his little analysis on each card, but it's a funny take to a lot of them. And I don't know, I'm really interested in Soddiq Yusuff out there. He is a dynamic fighter who has a diverse skill set, but he's going to have his hands full taking on a veteran this weekend in Edson Barboza. Now, Edson Barboza had his biggest run in the sport in the lightweight division, but him going down to featherweight, he's still been able to compete with some of the best out there. And if we know anything about Edson Barboza, there's still going to be a lot of flair to his game with the kicking. I mean, one of the most shared highlights in UFC history in terms of knockouts was his wheel kick that he finished Terry Edom against. That was right in mid-sentence of Joe Rogan talking about, hey, you better watch out because you might get knocked out. That's that very famous clip. That was Edson Jr. Barboza in that fight, knocking him out on command. In terms of routes to victory, though, Soddiq Yusuff is, in my opinion, he's the superior grappler, but he's going to have to figure out a way to get within that range to be able to take the action down that way. If he stays in kicking range and tries to make it a kickboxing fight with Edson Barboza, that might be trouble. But overall, I think that whether it's the wrestling or just being able to put a body on Barboza, that's been kind of his Achilles heel throughout his career. When he fought Khabib way back in the day, he had that 1,000-mile stare going against Khabib when Khabib was holding him down up against the fence. So, I don't know. It's not to say that he hasn't evolved or grown since that point, but there is one area of his game that is definitely lacking in comparison to his striking. Like I say, one of the most elite strikers in all of mixed martial arts. So if you're Soddiq Yusuff, to me, the smart play says we're not going to play that game with him if we have tools in our arsenal that are superior, which is the grappling department. In the co-main event, we have a women's flyweight matchup between Jennifer Maia and Viviane Araújo. That's going to be a fight that, I expect to see a fair amount of grappling in that matchup. It's either going to be we're going to see a lot of grappling between these two ladies, or they're going to respect each other's grappling game so much that they're going to slug it out on the feet. It's usually kind of how it goes when you have two experienced grapplers. But in terms of a matchup that pops off of the page, you're right. I hear your criticisms and the clamoring from the people online who have shared it with me coming into the show that how is this the co-main event when you have guys like Jonathan Martinez on the card and all. I understand what you're saying, but when you have someone like a Jennifer Maia who's a former title challenger, they're going to get that nod. But speaking of Jonathan Martinez, he is in that feature fight. He's number 13 in the bantamweight division, taking on number 14, Adrian Yanez. This fight has banger written all over. It is fireworks. It is a potential fight of the night candidate just based off of the two styles that these guys have. Now, yes, I'm a homer because I love Jonathan. That's been one of my boys for a long time. He's a factory Xer. He also has his own gym and team, MTZ Fight Club, down in Plainview, Texas. But Jonathan is, I think he's a more dynamic fighter than Adrian Yanez. I think that stylistically, it's a tremendous matchup for Jonathan because Yanez is a very boxing-heavy style. He's going to put a lot of weight on that lead leg, and he likes to come forward. Jonathan likes to do a lot of the same thing. He's going to bring the fight. He's going to bring it right to you. But when we start looking at tools within the arsenal, I believe that Jonathan is the superior wrestler, if it were to come to that. In terms of being at that long to mid-range, Jonathan's kicking game, as well as the knee from the left side, it's lethal. He's won bonuses multiple times using those type of weapons or setting up those attacks. So I foresee something similar within that situation. It's going to be an old-fashioned standoff where they're both going to go out there and just have a display of grit and heart. But in a technical brawl, give me Jonathan Martinez any day of the week. That is, like I say, a guy who just has pure dog in him, and he's ready to continue to make that climb towards the top in this bantamweight division. Those are the top three of the bill, but there are so many other fights and fighters to keep your eye on this weekend, ladies and gentlemen. First, how in the world is Chris El Guapo Gutierrez on the prelims as a ranked fighter against Alatong Ali? There's another bantamweight matchup that is scheduled to open the main card between Cameron Simon and Christian Rodriguez. It's no disrespect to these guys, but they're still very young in their UFC career. Only a couple of fights under the promotional banner. And you have a ranked guy that is below them. That just, to me, in terms of bout scheduling, and granted, that's always subject to change as we move closer to the weekend, but as it currently stands, that just doesn't make sense to me. There's an interesting matchup on the main card that's going down between middleweight Andre Petroski and Michel Pereira. This is Pereira's first walk to the UFC at 185 after multiple misses at 170 pounds. Most famously, the recent miss against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson that resulted in that fight being canceled. I think that Pereira is a very interesting fighter as a whole because he's so explosive with his movements. And I want to know how him going to 185 affects his ability, just simply because we did see at times where his fast twitch, his explosive movements, where he had issues with the energy efficiency and the conservation throughout the fight, where he would gas himself out. So him moving up to middleweight, that's interesting to me. It was originally a matchup that was slated to go up against the power bar Marc-Andre Barrial, but Andre Petroski filled in for the power bar, who pulled out not too long ago due to injury. If we know anything about Andre, we know that Andre is a solid wrestler. He's got those Pennsylvania wrestling chops, comes from that same camp as Joe Pyfer. I think the smart bet for Andre is to not mess around with the striking game in this matchup and go straight after Pereira, try to take him down and grind him that way. But again, it's a couple of guys who are real muscled up, who may both run each other into the red line, and we'll see how that goes in terms of the energy between the two of them. But Andre has built up a nice little resume for himself as well in the UFC and has shown that he can win fights at the middleweight division. How will he do against someone who presents the dynamic striking threats and the unorthodox attacks and tactics that Pereira has? That's why they fight the fight. We're going to see on Saturday. We have Darren Elkins taking on downtown TJ Brown. Now, if you've ever seen a Darren Elkins fight, folks, you know that there is going to be damage taking place. That's not his nickname for no reason. It's also for no reason why he has one of potentially the worst tattoos in the UFC right across the center of his chest. But that is on brand, on point for Darren Elkins. TJ Brown is a savvy veteran of that division, but I don't know how this matchup is going to play out between the two of them, because Darren Elkins is a guy who he can either put it together and look extremely electric and have one of those fight-stopping performances, and he's never out until you completely put him out. But with as much damage as he's accumulated through the years, you just always have to wonder, has that punch ticker gone one too many past its stopping point? So that's going to be something that we'll have to see coming into this weekend. If he does ever take that shot in, TJ Brown has a really solid guillotine, so be on the look for that. are there any other matchups out there that you guys have your eyes on? Because there's one last matchup on this card, or one last fight and fighter that I think you just have to ask the question, man, how much does the UFC love them some Terrence T. Rex McKinney? With as talent rich and saturated as the roster already is at 155 pounds, along with there being two qualified lightweights fighting on Dana White's Contender Series tonight, as earlier mentioned, Markel Medeiros and Isakov, they decided to not go with either of those options and sign a debut kid to fight the 7-time vet. Not to knock Marot, the kid who's coming in to fight Terrence, but his opponent's combined record is like a 32 and 37, something around in that range. I just feel like there were options either already on the roster or some of these guys who were in position for the Contender Series that could have been a shoo-in for that opportunity. I'm not the matchmaker, though. I'm not management, but it just is a little bit perplexing to me there. That wraps up our UFC Fight Night preview segment right there. Stick around after the break, folks. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by the Fan Cave on 98.1 FM, Mile High Sports Radio.
Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. That helps us continue to produce this original MMA content and bring it for you every single week. Tune in to the MMA Plug presented by
Fan Cave
on 98.1 FM, Mile High Sports Radio.